The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean issued an annual report this Thursday, revealing that in 2020, poverty and extreme poverty in the region reached levels not seen in decades. Following talks this Thursday, the Organisation of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies decided to allow a slight increase in crude production in the face of fragile market demand. In Paraguay, medical personnel denounced the collapse of the health system and called on the government to adopt measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. This Thursday, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean reported that in 2020, poverty and extreme poverty in the region reached levels not seen in the past 12 and 20 years, respectively. The rise in poverty was due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and came despite the emergency social protection measures that countries adopted to halt it. The annual report indicates that poverty is greater in rural areas, among children and adolescents, indigenous and Afro-descendant people, and in the population with lower educational levels. Meanwhile, the indices of inequality in the region worsened along with employment and labour participation rates, especially among women. The report adds that the increase in poverty and extreme poverty levels would be even greater in the absence of the measures implemented by governments to transfer emergency income to households. Given this situation, the Commission is calling to guarantee universal social protection as a central pillar of the welfare state.
Another thing that is important is vulnerability. This is something that we've referred to in other outlooks, and this has to do with social mobility. We could see that in Latin America, 491 million people were living on incomes up to 3 times the poverty line. That is to say, 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans are vulnerable, 79%, but it's 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans that face tremendous vulnerability, and therefore we absolutely need universal social protection systems.
The Supreme Electoral Court of El Salvador will begin to process the election results for 5 mayors' offices of the country this Thursday. Despite the victory in the municipal and legislative elections held on Sunday, the ruling New Ideas Party disputed the results in the municipalities of Guaymango, Jujutla and Turin, while the opposition Faribundo Martí National Liberation Front did the same in the towns of Arcatao and Nueva Trinidad. The complaints were presented on Wednesday in the framework of the last count to declare the final results of the legislative and municipal elections of February 28th. The court announced that it will only review the ballots in those municipalities where the sum of the refuted votes could change the winner. Bolivia has entered a period of electoral silence in the run-up to the regional elections to be held this Sunday, March 7th. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal informed that political organisations and citizen groups must conclude all campaign activities during the period. It also indicated that violation of the electoral silence would be penalised with the immediate withdrawal of the propaganda and fines both against the political organisation involved and the broadcasting media. The Electoral Authority also indicated that it's moving forward with the distribution of voting materials.
We have already concluded the assembly of the electoral cases containing all the sensitive material for each one of the polling stations, the bag containing all the disinfection and biosecurity materials to be provided to each one of the polling sites. Obviously, we already have the schedules adjusted and all the routes programmed for the distribution of the electoral materials in strict compliance with the Supreme Electoral Tribunal's instructions from the printing press where the material originates. We are talking about ballot papers, worksheets, the election return, which is an essential document, and the voting cards, the index list. So this material has already been reviewed. All the control measures.
Citizens in Argentina have announced they are on high alert against mega mining projects in Chubut province in the Argentinian Patagonia. On Wednesday, demonstrations were held in Esquel and cities throughout the province after the Commission on Natural Resources of the provincial legislature authorised the mining zone project promoted by the local governor, which was supported by the national executive. The bill enables mega mining in the Meseta area and could be approved in a legislative session this Thursday. The move comes despite strong opposition from the local population and the scientific community, in addition to allegations of repression, corruption and a lack of consultation with indigenous peoples. On Wednesday, the US House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which bans law enforcement from using chokeholds and seeks to tackle impunity in cases of police brutality. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd died after a white police officer kneeled on his neck for about 9 minutes. The incident sparked widespread demonstrations not only in the United States but worldwide against police brutality and systemic racism. The bill was passed on partisan lines of 219 to 213 votes, with no Republicans voting with the Democratic majority. The bill will now pass to the Senate, where its success is uncertain. Republicans favour a more limited police reform proposal that Democrats have dismissed as too small in scope. At least 10 Republican votes are required to ensure the bill passes in the upper house.
George Floyd. Violence continues. We cannot accept this epidemic of injustice, which is why we will pass and send, we have passed now, we have passed and sent to the Senate and to the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, so it can become the law of the land. Mentioned. It will not erase centuries of systemic racism and excessive policing, and it will not bring back George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, say her name, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, or the countless others who have been killed or harmed. But it will take a tremendous step forward to stop the violence, stem the suffering, and start to build a better America.
And a session of the United States House of Representatives was cancelled this Thursday amid high security after authorities warned of a possible plot to breach Congress. According to intelligence sources, conspiracy theorist group QAnon was plotting an attack 2 months after supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the building. Heavy security measures were adopted and the Capitol was completely blocked off by a steel wall, which law enforcement was deployed across the site. Lawmakers and staff were advised to stay away after the FBI and Department of Homeland Security warned that violent militia groups had talked about attacking the legislature on or around March 4th. Their bulletin also said the extremists remain motivated by unfounded Republican claims of widespread voter fraud. Following talks this Thursday, the Organisation of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies decided to allow a slight increase in crude production in the face of fragile market demand. A statement issued after the ministerial-level virtual talks indicated that the participants approved the maintenance of March production levels for the month of April, with the exception of Russia and Kazakhstan, which may increase production by 130,000 and 20,000 barrels per day, respectively. The group cut production sharply last year due to a sudden drop in prices caused by the coronavirus pandemic, but agreed to gradually increase supply. However, the agreed increase was less than a third of the amount that market watchers had expected.
We have a good agreement, a surprising agreement, but I know that, and because of that, we've elected to extend the voluntary cut for another 1 million.
At least 7 Afghan civilians were shot and killed by unknown gunmen overnight in the east of Afghanistan. The provincial police chief in Nangarhar province said the victims of the attack were workers at a plaster factory in Nusukrod district. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for similar attacks in the country, but many others have gone unclaimed. The increase in attacks on civilians comes as the Afghan government and the Taliban continue peace talks aimed at bringing an end to the decades-long conflict in the country, sparked by the 2001 invasion by the United States.
Today, in the Sorkrod district, our 7 innocent countrymen were martyred. They were working in a plaster factory. 4 suspected people have been arrested. I am hopeful that the person who is behind this will be identified after the interrogations.
Several thousand protesters returned to the streets of Myanmar's second-largest city on Thursday, despite the brutal police action the previous day that left an estimated 3 people dead, including a young university student. Protesters in Mandalay built barricades around their protest site to impede any charge by police. In the end, police stayed away and the rally ended peacefully. Students were again prominent in the demonstration, along with teachers and private banking staff. The United Nations said 38 people were killed in protests across the country on Wednesday. It was the highest death toll in a single day since the February 1st military takeover. More than 50 civilians, mostly peaceful protesters, are confirmed to have been killed by police and soldiers since then. And funerals took place on Thursday in Myanmar for some of the victims killed by security forces. Thousands of mourners in Mandalay applauded and gave defiant three-fingered salutes as the hearse carrying the body of a university student made its way through the streets of the city. The victim was struck in the head when police opened fire on a demonstration of teachers and students on Wednesday. And on Thursday, China expressed hope that all sides in Myanmar will appropriately handle their differences within the constitutional and legal framework to maintain political and social stability in the country.
Been in contact with all sides in Myanmar to actively promote de-escalation of tensions. We support the efforts of ASEAN countries to help Myanmar ease the situation in an ASEAN way, while upholding the principles of non-interfering in Myanmar's internal affairs and making decisions through consensus, and maintaining the solidarity and cooperation of the Asian family.
This Thursday, former French Prime Minister Edouard Balladur was acquitted of charges relating to the financing of his 1995 presidential campaign. The allegations against Balladur came to light during an investigation into the 2002 bombing in Karachi, Pakistan, that targeted a bus transporting French engineers and which investigators believe may have been revenge for halting commission payments for arms deals. 15 people were killed in the attack, including 11 engineers and 2 Pakistanis. Balladur claimed the money for his campaign came from donations from supporters and merchandise sales. But prosecutors linked the money to cash withdrawals in Switzerland made by a Lebanese-French intermediary who took commissions on the arms deals. A day ahead of his trip to Iraq, Pope Francis released a video message for the people of the country.
In Iraq. As-salam laum, peace to you. In a few days I will finally be among you. I am looking forward to meeting you, to seeing your faces, to seeing your land, an ancient and extraordinary cradle of civilization. I come as a pilgrim, as a penitent pilgrim to implore the Lord for forgiveness and reconciliation after years of war and terrorism, to ask God for the consolation of hearts and the healing of wounds. And I come among as a pilgrim of peace to repeat, you are all brothers. Yes, I come as a pilgrim of peace in search of fraternity, animated by the desire to pray together and to walk together, also with brothers and sisters of other religious traditions, in the sign of Father Abraham, who unites in a single family Muslims, Jews and Christians.
South African newsrooms are mourning the death of veteran journalist and commentator Karima Brown. During apartheid, she was a political activist against the white supremacist government. In post-apartheid South Africa, Karima used her journalism to advance the rights of the working class. We have more from our correspondent Matuba Malachi in the following report.
Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold those...
Many South Africans plan their Sundays around Karima Brown's TV show to get their weekly fix. But before her larger-than-life personality became known to younger journalists, she was an anti-apartheid activist. Karima nailed her colors to the mast, unapologetically making public her political affiliation to the African National Congress of her father, who was also an activist in the Western Cape during apartheid. The ANC is now in government, and Karima Brown was one of the fiercest critics of the former liberation movement. In 2019, she outlined the failures of the ANC during an interview with teleSUR.
The choices that the ANC made is partly why we sit with the inequality that we had. So, for example, the ANC did not introduce free compulsory education when it started, and that would have been a way to empower those who are locked out of the economy with the necessary skills to be absorbed. I'm Karima Brown, and I'm going to be on your radio.
Karima was a newsroom leader in almost all media houses she worked for. From print, radio and TV, she was known for strength and conviction in what she believed in. On her last radio show, she featured voices of Latin America, especially against the Donald Trump administration, which sought to oust Venezuela's government of the day. The people of Venezuela have sent their condolences.
Today we were saddened to learn of the passing of our great friend Karima Brown, who besides being an extraordinary person, was an excellent professional, friend of our people, and friend and defender of just causes. Today, on behalf of the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela that I represent, and on my own behalf, we want to express to her family and friends our deepest condolences for such an irreparable loss. Karima, you will always be in our hearts.
Karima was laid to rest in a private burial ceremony held in accordance with Islamic rites and traditions. For teleSUR, I'm Matuba Mahlachi in Pretoria.
Paraguay medical workers have denounced the collapse of the healthcare system and called on the government to take measures to reduce the rate of coronavirus infections. This Wednesday, doctors in Paraguay suggested the government pass a decree that contemplates 14 days of total quarantine in order to contain the cycle of infections. The doctors reported that health centres lack basic supplies to treat patients infected with COVID-19, as well as ambulances. The country's reported almost 163,000 cases and over 3,000 deaths. In Cuba, the Center for State Control of Medicines, Equipment and Medical Devices authorized the beginning of phase 3 clinical trials of the Soberana 02 vaccine candidate after analyzing the documentation presented by the Finlay Institute of Vaccines. The government announced that the phase 3 trials will start with more than 85,000 volunteers in Havana, Santiago de Cuba and Guantanamo. The drug is the first vaccine candidate produced in Latin America against the virus. The production of 150,000 doses of Soberana 02 is already advancing of the 100 million planned. Mass production of another vaccine candidate named Abdallah has also begun. A shipment of 280,000 doses of Russia's Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine arrived in Hungary on Thursday as authorities announced they were tightening pandemic restrictions in an effort to mitigate a rapid rise in deaths and hospitalizations. The foreign minister said the vaccines would be available to citizens immediately once authorized by the country's regulatory body. The latest shipment comes as Hungary faces another surge of the virus, with new daily cases and hospitalizations rapidly approaching their previous peaks of December. Thursday marked 1 year since the first confirmed COVID-19 case in the country and saw over 6,000 new cases reported, as well as over 150 deaths, representing the deadliest day since December 23rd. On Thursday, the Philippines received more than 400,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine under the global COVAX initiative. A plane carrying the shots was welcomed by the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte, on touching down at Manila Airport. The Philippines is among the first countries in Southeast Asia to receive vaccines through the COVAX program. The initiative is a joint effort by several global organizations, including Gavi, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF, and aims to provide millions of coronavirus vaccine doses to low and middle-income countries by the end of 2021. Several African nations, including Ghana, Nigeria and the Ivory Coast, have already received thousands of doses through COVAX.
I don't know how to express my gratitude to the donor countries. That you remember the poor nations is in fact already a plus for humanity. And in behalf of the Republic of the Philippines and of the people and all, I'd like to say again that we felt the gratitude in our hearts, and may God bless you for your benevolence. Thank you.
On Thursday, Egypt launched a second phase of a nationwide vaccination campaign against the coronavirus by vaccinating some of the country's elderly and those with underlying medical conditions. Health Minister Hala Sayed reported that people would receive the Chinese Sinopharm vaccine or the British AstraZeneca shot in 40 vaccination centres across the country. The Health Ministry began rolling out its COVID-19 vaccination programme in January by providing shots to frontline health workers. Egypt has so far registered more than 184,000 COVID-19 cases and over 10,000 deaths. A batch of COVID-19 vaccines donated by China arrived in the capital of Guinea, Conakry, on Wednesday. Foreign Minister Ibrahima Khalil Kaba and Health Minister Rami Lamal, as well as the Chinese ambassador to the country, Huang Wei, attended the handover ceremony held at the airport. The Foreign Minister expressed his heartfelt thanks to the Chinese government and people for the donation, noting that the Chinese side responded quickly and actively offered help as soon as the country expressed its need for vaccines. The official also stressed that China's support has provided the Guinean government with effective means to protect its people's health and safety. The head of the World Health Organization's Europe office has called on countries to get back to focusing on suppressing the spread of COVID-19 after the region registered a 9% increase in cases over the past week.
New cases of COVID-19 in Europe rose 9% to just above 1 million. This brought a promising 6-week decline in new cases to an end, with more than half of our region seeing increasing numbers of new infections. We are seeing a resurgence in Central and Eastern Europe. New cases are also on the rise in several Western European countries where rates were already high. Continued strain on our hospitals and health workers is being met with acts of medical solidarity between European neighbours. Nonetheless, over a year into the pandemic, our health systems should not be in this situation.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.